4 miles. Not 4,000, 4. The plastic was still on the seats when the connecting rod came apart inside this engine. That truck never made it out of the dealership parking lot, and the man who signed for it is still making the payment on it every month. And it is not one truck. Across 2 manufacturers, close to 1 million vehicles have been recalled in the United States over engines that were coming apart from the inside. And federal investigators have now opened a case into the engines those recalls left out. So here is exactly what you are going to get in the next 20 minutes. First, the real numbers, straight from the recall filings, so you know how many vehicles and which ones. Then the 4 engines at the center of it, brand by brand. Then the 3 specific things engineers changed inside a modern engine that are causing this, explained in plain English. Then what the dealer actually says when you call, what the repair really costs when you add it all up, and the engines that are still doing fine right now. Because there are some. And at the end, 5 things you can do this week if one of these is sitting in your driveway. Let us start with how a truck engine got here in the first place. 15 years ago, the F-150 came with a V8. The Silverado came with a V8. The Tundra came with a 5.7-liter V8 that would cross 300,000 miles on oil changes and not much else. Nobody bought an extended warranty because they were frightened of the engine. You bought one for the transmission, or the electronics, or the air conditioning. The engine was the part you did not think about. What changed is not a secret, and it is not a conspiracy. Fuel economy standards tightened year after year. Manufacturers needed the same horsepower and the same towing numbers out of less displacement, and the industry answer was almost identical across every brand. Shrink the block. Add a turbocharger. Spray the fuel straight into the cylinder instead of the intake port. Thin the oil down. Shut the engine off at every red light. Shut half the cylinders off on the highway. Each of those, on its own, is a defensible engineering decision. Every one of them buys a real fraction of a mile per gallon, but stack all 6 on top of each other inside the same block, and the slack the old engines had, the margin that let them survive a hot day, a heavy trailer, and a late oil change is gone. That margin is what you actually paid for in a truck. And that is the backdrop for everything that follows. What comes next is the specific hardware brand by brand, and every number here comes from the manufacturer's own filings and from federal records. The 6.2-liter V8 that General Motors calls the L87 is the upgrade engine. It is the one in the Silverado, the Sierra, the Tahoe, the Yukon, the Suburban, and the Escalade. It is not the base engine, it is the box you tick and pay extra for, on the theory that the bigger V8 is the one that lasts. In April of 2025, GM filed recall number N252494001. In the United States, that recall covers 597,630 trucks and SUVs. Worldwide, it is roughly 721,000. Read what the filing actually blames, because this is the part that matters. It points at the crankshafts machined outside dimensional tolerance, the wrong surface finish on the bearing journals, debris left in the rod bearings. In plain English, the parts that hold the bottom end of the engine together were not made to the size they were supposed to be. That is not a wear item. That is not something you caused with your right foot. That was true on the day the truck rolled off the line, before anyone turned the key. When a bearing journal is out of specification, the film of oil that keeps metal from touching metal is thinner than the designer intended, and it works. It works right up until it does not. Then the bearing material goes through the rest of the engine, and there is no warning light for that. There is a noise, and by the time you hear the noise, it is already finished. Here is the part almost nobody covers, and it is the reason this story is not over. A recall is a list. It is a range of build dates and a set of VIN numbers, and like every list, it has an edge. If your truck is inside that range, General Motors replaces the engine. If your truck was built 1 week outside that range, with the same engine, the same design, the same supplier, and the same failure, you are not a recall. You are a customer with an estimate in your hand. That is exactly why federal investigators went back in. The Office of Defects Investigation at NHTSA logged 1,157 reports of engine bearing failure, and in October of 2025, they upgraded the case to an engineering analysis specifically to examine L87 engines that the recall never touched. Understand what that means. An engineering analysis is the stage before a manufacturer gets pushed into a wider recall. It is not a verdict. Nothing has been concluded, and it may conclude nothing at all. But it means the federal government looked at the boundary General Motors drew around this problem and decided that boundary was worth a second look. And until that file closes, nobody at any dealership can honestly tell you that your build date is safe. The 5.3-liter is the volume engine. It is in far more trucks than the 6.2 ever was, and it has a separate older problem in the cylinder deactivation hardware. Watch any shop pull one apart and you will notice something. They are not hunting. They already know which lifter on which bank before the valve cover comes off. When a repair becomes that predictable, it has stopped being a defect. It has quietly become a service interval that nobody wrote down in your owner's manual. Then there is the 3-liter Duramax, the small diesel, the sensible choice, the engine you buy specifically to avoid all of this. It has been failing at the thrust bearing, and General Motors has a dealer bulletin out on it, numbered 25NA307. Understand what a bulletin is and is not, because the difference is your money. A recall obligates the manufacturer to fix your vehicle. A bulletin tells the dealer how to handle it if you happen to show up and complain. One is a promise made to you. The other is an instruction written for somebody else, and you are not the one holding it. Toyota is in this too, and for a lot of owners, this is the one that stings. People paid a premium for a Tundra for one reason, the V8, and the reputation attached to it. In 2022, that V8 was retired and replaced with a 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6 that Toyota calls the V35A. Toyota's recall, campaign number 25V767, covers more than 270,000 trucks and SUVs. The cause, named in the filing, is machining debris, metal left behind during manufacturing that can travel to the main bearings and destroy the engine from the inside. And it is not only the Tundra. The same engine sits in the Sequoia, in the Lexus LX, and in the Lexus GX. Then, on May 20th of 2026, Toyota filed campaign 26V320 and added roughly 44,000 more 2024 Tundras to the list. Read that date one more time. That is not a company closing a file. That is a company, 2 years after the first campaign, still finding the edges of the problem. Now, why? Because every one of these failures traces back to the same 3 engineering decisions, and once you understand them, you will never look at a window sticker the same way. Number 1, the oil got thinner and the pressure went up. Older truck engines ran a thick oil, 10W30, sometimes 10W40. Modern engines run 0W20 and increasingly 0W16. Thinner oil moves faster, it costs less horsepower to pump, and it measurably improves fuel economy. That is the whole reason for it. But oil is not just a lubricant. It is a physical wedge that holds the crankshaft off the bearing. Make the wedge thinner and hold the tolerance perfectly, and it still works. Make the wedge thinner on a crankshaft that was machined out of specification, and there is nothing left in reserve. Then add boost. In a small turbocharged engine, there is a failure mode called low-speed pre-ignition, where the fuel lights off early and unevenly at low RPM under heavy load, exactly the condition of pulling away from a stoplight with a trailer behind you. The spike it puts through the rod is violent, and it is measured in thousands of pounds. That is the load landing on the thin oil film. Number 2. The fuel goes straight into the cylinder now. Direct injection sprays fuel at extreme pressure into the combustion chamber instead of into the intake port. It makes more power out of less fuel, so every manufacturer moved to it. The side effect is that some of that raw fuel washes down past the piston rings and ends up in the oil pan. It is called fuel dilution, and if you have ever checked your dipstick and found the level higher than when you filled it, that is what you were looking at. Diluted oil is thinner oil, so the engine that was already designed to run on the thinnest oil in automotive history is now running on something thinner than that, and the owner has no way to know it is happening because the dashboard does not measure oil quality. It measures mileage and time. Every bearing in your engine floats on oil pressure that only exists while the engine is turning. When it stops, that pressure falls to zero. When it starts again, there is a fraction of a second before the pump refills the galleries, and in that fraction of a second, metal is riding on metal. Engineers know this, and modern systems are designed to manage it, but a truck in city traffic can now do that dozens of times a day, thousands of times a year, on a bearing surface that was already made smaller and running on oil that was already made thinner. None of these three things is a scandal by itself. That is the point everyone misses. Stack all three on top of a crankshaft machined out of tolerance, and the failures we are talking about stop being a mystery and start being arithmetic. Everything up to here is paperwork. Here is what that paperwork turns into at the service counter. A Ford technician on a Ford put a teardown on camera after the manufacturer ran a cost cap analysis on a truck still inside its 60,000-mile powertrain warranty. He's looking at metal shavings in an engine he had been told was operating normally. That word is the one to watch: normal. Once a failure is classified as normal, it stops being a defect. It becomes a characteristic of the vehicle you bought, and there is nothing left to claim. One owner had a warranty claim denied under the heading of excessive use on a truck built to work. Another bought a vehicle and had a head gasket let go within a week, and the dealer would not make it right. A third took delivery of a new Sierra, had trouble inside 10 days, and described the dealership as shifting the problem back onto him, the consumer, in his words, leaving him driving a truck he had just financed while he waited to find out whether the engine would hold together. None of these people did anything to their engines. That is the thread running through every one of these stories. The repair bill is the number everybody quotes. It is also the smallest number in this section. An engine replacement on a modern half-ton runs into 5 figures. Owners have posted quotes at $10,000 and above, and on the twin-turbo V6 trucks, where the turbochargers and the plumbing have to come off and go back on, the labor side is worse, not better. But that is only the invoice. Add up the rest of it, the replacement blocks have been back-ordered, and owners have reported waiting months. During those months, the payment does not stop. A $70,000 truck financed over 6 years is roughly $1,200 a month, so a 3-month wait is about $3,600 spent on a vehicle sitting on a lift. The insurance does not stop. The registration does not stop. The loaner, if the dealer gave you one at all, runs out long before the engine arrives. Then there is the money you spend trying to prevent it. The extended warranty that people are now buying specifically because of this typically runs a few $1,000s on a truck like this. That is money the previous generation of owners never spent because nobody was afraid of the engine. And then there is the number nobody puts on the estimate. When that truck finally comes back, the repair sits in its history permanently. You are no longer selling a truck with a new engine in it. You are selling a truck that needed one. Every buyer who runs the report sees exactly what you saw, and they price it accordingly. You did not cause it, you did not choose it, and you are the one carrying it. Now, in fairness, because this matters, and almost nobody says it, not every modern engine is doing this. Some of them are doing extremely well, and the pattern in which ones is the most useful information in this entire video. Ford's 7.3-liter gas V8, the one everybody calls Godzilla, is in the Super Duty trucks. Look at what it is. A big pushrod V8 with iron in the right places, port fuel injection, and no turbocharger anywhere near it. It is deliberately old-fashioned, and it is developing a reputation for outlasting everything around it. Toyota's 5.7-liter V8, the engine the current Tundra replaced, is the same story. Naturally aspirated, port injection, a thicker oil, and enough displacement that it never had to work very hard. Master technicians open these up past 300,000 miles and find them in remarkable condition. And on the diesel side, the 6.7-liter Cummins keeps producing trucks past 500,000 miles, with maintenance records that fit on one page. So what do the survivors have in common? Not one thing: the absence of the stack. Fewer compromises piled into the same block. Displacement instead of boost. Thicker oil instead of the thinnest possible. Simple valve trains instead of hardware that shuts cylinders off. That is not nostalgia, and it is not an argument that old is automatically better. It is the same engineering point from the other direction. Every one of these efficiency features costs a little bit of margin. Take one, and the engine absorbs it. Take all of them at once, and there is nothing left to absorb a mistake on the machine shop floor. If one of these is in your driveway right now, this is the part worth writing down. 1. Run your VIN yourself. Go to the NHTSA recall lookup and enter it. Do not take the dealer's word over the phone, and do not assume a clean result. Last year is still clean today. Campaigns get expanded, and the Toyota campaign has already been expanded twice. 2. Keep every service record, receipts, dates, mileage, and the oil specification. If you change your own oil, photograph the jug and the odometer in the same frame. Warranty claims get denied over documentation far more often than they get denied over the failure itself. 3. Use the exact oil in the manual, not close to it. The specification in writing every time, and do not stretch the interval because the dash says you can. On these engines, the oil grade is not a recommendation, it is part of the design margin, and it is the first thing anyone will ask you about. 4. Get everything in writing. If a service advisor tells you a noise is normal, ask for that sentence on the repair order, signed and dated. A verbal "they all do that" is worth nothing to you 6 months later. A written one is a document, and documents are what move a denied claim. 5. File the complaint. If your engine fails, report it to NHTSA yourself. That is not a formality, and it is not shouting into the void. The 1,157 reports that open the federal investigation are exactly this: individual owners filing individually, one at a time. That is the only number in this entire video that owners control. So here is where it stands. Close to 1 million vehicles recalled across 2 manufacturers. 1,157 bearing failures on file with the federal government. An engineering analysis still open into the engines the recall left out. A dealer bulletin instead of a recall on the small diesel. And a Toyota campaign that was still growing in May of 2026. Underneath every one of those numbers is the same sentence from the people who take these apart for a living. Something inside this engine was wrong before anybody ever drove it. The old trucks did not do this, not because the steel was better, and not because the men who built them cared more than the ones building them now, because there were fewer places for a machining error to hide, and because a man in his own driveway could find it before it found him. If your engine has been recalled or your claim was denied, put it in the comments, tell me the brand, the mileage, and exactly what they told you at the counter. I read every one of them, and those replies decide what gets covered next. And subscribe, because the next one is about what happens to these trucks after the replacement engine goes in.